I wanted to say good morning to those of you that are here this morning, and to those of you from the East Coast who've been up half a day already, good afternoon. I know we've all been experiencing that this week. I especially wanted to this morning also just look out into that camera, because you may know that for the first time ever, NACM is live streaming our sessions on the web to a number of our members who can't be here. And so to those of you that are watching at home, welcome. We wish you could be here. We miss you, but we're glad you're getting to participate in some of the education with us this week. You are missing out on a lot of the great opportunities for networking and the wonderful world-class exhibit show that will be on Wednesday, but we're excited you get to see some of the world-class education we'll be providing to you this week. So welcome to everyone, including those at home. If you would please join with me, we're going to have a presentation of the color guard as well as our pledge, so please stand and rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join with me in the pledge to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in thanking our color guard this morning for their service. And please be seated. This is a especially special color guard today. The four individuals you just saw are made up of local court employees or employees of Maricopa County who are either retired military or reservists. So thank you very much for joining us this morning and for your service to our country. I would also like to welcome with us this year the National Conference of Metropolitan Courts, also known as Metro Courts. Thank you so much for joining with us this year to partner for this conference. We're really excited to have you here. There are a number of you from that organization who have decided to join us this week, and we appreciate your attendance today. Today we have a very special guest from the state of Arizona. Chief Justice Scott Bells from the Supreme Court of Arizona is with us today to provide a welcome to all of you to his state. Chief Justice Scott Bells is the newest Chief Justice in the United States. I'll explain that in just a second, but we are really excited to have him. He is, as I said, the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court. He was appointed originally to the court in 2005 by Governor Janet Napolitano through Arizona's merit selection system. He was retained for a 6-year term in 2008 and was elected by his fellow justices as Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court effective June 27, 2014. He replaced Justice Rebecca Birch as Chief Justice. Chief Justice Bells graduated cum laude from Michigan State University in 1978. I know there are some of you here from Michigan State. He graduated also from a little university in Cambridge, Harvard University, with a master's in economics in 1980 and earned his JD magna cum laude from Harvard Law School in 1983. While he was at Harvard Law School, he was a member of the board of editors of the Harvard Law Review. So a pretty prestigious background. He continued that prestige on, and he clerked for the Office of the Solicitor General in 1983. Went on to clerk for a federal judge on the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And from 1984 to 1985, he clerked for our friend, Associate Justice Sandra Day O'Connor of the United States Supreme Court. Please join me in welcoming Chief Justice Bells.
Well, David, thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to say hello to all of you. There was a 19th century Arizona judge named Richard Sloan, and he talked in his memoirs about how when he had come here from California, he was surprised to see these tall, giant, columnar bodies with outstretched arms that seemed, depending on how one's mood might interpret, to be raised in either menace or warning. Well, I can tell you, our saguaros, they're actually raising their arms in welcome. Bienvenidos, yatahe. I wish I could tell you that it's a dry heat, but you're here in our monsoon season, so you know better. If time allows outside of your conference and you want to escape the heat, I encourage you to take advantage of some local attractions that are really worth your time. Just up the road is something called the Musical Instrument Museum. It's an interactive museum with instruments from all around the world. It's truly an amazing and unique facility, air-conditioned. If you want to see something of old Scottsdale, you might go the other direction down the road. There is a small but really quite impressive museum of contemporary art in Old Town Scottsdale. It's an architecturally interesting building by local architect Will Bruder, and it currently has a very interesting exhibit of contemporary photography by a man named Bill Owens. If you want to go a little further afield, you want to come down in more of my neighborhood in Phoenix, the Phoenix Art Museum is open Wednesday night. It too is a really beautiful building, and it currently has an exhibit on fashion associated with the Academy Awards. Pretty interesting, actually. And the Heard Museum is nearby, and it is, I think, although I'm probably biased, our nation's best museum of both historical and contemporary Native American art. So if you do have some time, I encourage you to take advantage of some of those places. I'm also very pleased that Arizona can host the concurrent conferences of the National Association of Court Managers and the National Association of Metropolitan Courts. And I say that for several reasons. First, Arizona has had a long and very productive relationship with both of those groups. Marcus Renkesmeyer, the former president of NACM's One Illustration. Another is Roxanne Song-On, who I believe some of you have already heard from. Roxanne is, I understand, the current or soon-to-be chair or president of the National Association of Metropolitan Courts. She is a treasure in Arizona's judiciary. We recognized her last year as the Arizona Judge of the Year. I know she's teaching at some of the programs during this conference, and I like to think that she sort of exemplifies the quality of Arizona's courts, and the same could be said for Marcus. Of course, another reason I'm pleased that we're hosting this conference is my own educational background. I'm proud to be a Spartan, and I'm pleased that there is a partnership between Michigan State University and NACM related to education and judicial administration. Finally, I think your organizations correctly recognize, and indeed the theme of this conference illustrates, that the challenge that we face in courts across our country is how, as our population changes, as our economy changes, as technology evolves, do we continue to meaningfully afford access to justice to the people whom we serve? And believe that intensely. One thing that happens when we have a new Chief Justice in Arizona is we spend a lot of time thinking about a new strategic agenda. I, in doing that, drew heavily on our very experienced court managers, and we recognized that in terms of access to justice, we need to think about things like how do you really implement programs like e-filing or e-access? How do you deal with the large and growing numbers of people who are self-represented, either because of their economic circumstances or by choice? And I know those are topics you're taking up this week. Another very important question is how do we work to continue to improve court processes through things like court time standards or better case management, other topics that you're also taking up. In Arizona, we've been concerned about how we use things like specialty courts to better protect our communities. How do we use evidence-based practices to ensure that probation is handled efficiently and effectively? How do we extend that learning to things like pretrial supervision? And those are all topics that I know you're taking up over the course of this week's conference. So I'm confident that our courts here in Arizona are going to benefit from the proceedings over the course of this week. I suspect that the courts in your states will as well. I wish you a most successful program, and again, welcome to Arizona.
Thank you, Chief. I also want to recognize and thank the State Court Administrator for Arizona, Dave Byers, who has been a tremendous support for us in this conference. I see you in the back of the room there, Dave. Thank you so much for all your help this week. For those of you that have been first-time attenders at NACM, you'll recognize this NACMopoly that we do for first-time attendees, and the intent is to try to get our first-time attendees well acquainted with NACM on their first night at the conference. And so last night we worked on that, and we had a drawing for a free conference registration for a future conference. And the award winner for that is Kalisha Thompson from the Superior Court of Fulton County. So congratulations, Kalisha. This organization has existed for almost 30 years, and it's been as a result of a number of hardworking people. And I would especially like to recognize this morning all of NACM's past presidents who are in attendance who have given tirelessly of their efforts over the years. So if you could please hold your applause, but if you would stand as I recognize you, I would appreciate it. Past President Kent Batty, Kevin Bowling, Paul Burke, John Clark, Janet Cornell, Jude Del Prior, Colin Zajoma, Suzanne James, Norm Meyer, Larry Myers, Marcus Rinkensmeyer, Joy Sorensen, Suzanne Stinson, Shelley Euchre, and Bob Wessels. And I hope I didn't miss any of you that are here. Please join me in thanking our past presidents. I did this last night, but some of you were talking, so I'll do it again today. I would like to recognize the people who are attending from our international friends who are here. So we have with us this week representation from Canada, Nigeria, Micronesia, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the United States and to the NACM conference. As I mentioned with the past presidents who've given tirelessly of their service over the years, when we put on one of these conferences, we couldn't do what we do without the generous support of our sponsors. We have this year 2 diamond sponsors, Thomson Reuters and Tyler Technologies. Please join me in thanking them for their support. We also have a number of other sponsors. Our silver sponsor, for the record, this morning's keynote of Seth Mattison is being sponsored by Courtview. You'll hear about that even more in a minute. The Wi-Fi today, which the information is up here, password NACM Fact, is being sponsored by Fact. The mobile side is being sponsored by New Dawn Technologies and Sustain Technologies. The conference tote bag that you received is being sponsored by Pioneer Technology Group. The schedule at a glance you have is being sponsored by HDR. The tumbler cups you received in your bag are being sponsored by New Dawn Technologies. The lanyards are being sponsored by Tyler Technologies. The Fun Run and Walk is being sponsored by GC Services. And the golf tournament whole sponsor is Alliance One Receivables. Tuesday's social event sponsors are Xerox, Turbo Court, Mentis Technology Solutions, and Infax. Please join me in thanking them for their generous support of NACM. In addition to our sponsors, we have had a very nice partner over the years in the State Justice Institute. State Justice Institute is a quasi-federal government agency that helps provide funding to the state courts, and many of our courts across the country have benefited from the generous support of State Justice Institute. NACM is no exception, and that we've had a partner in them for a number of years. So I would like to thank Jonathan Mattiello and the State Justice Institute for their continued support. In particular, we would like to thank them for underwriting the videotaping of the annual conference keynotes and workshops, which will be available on the website soon. That will allow you to go back and watch the ones you missed or to show the ones that you watched and really enjoyed to your colleagues back at home. It was also the SJI grant that made it possible to live stream some of the sessions today from this year's conference as well. So Jonathan, I don't know where you're at in the room, if we could all join together and please recognizing and thanking him and SJI. In addition to Dave Byers, I mentioned earlier, I would like to thank the local Arizona courts, the Arizona AOC, Maricopa County, and the Conference Development Committee members, and so many other folks who've contributed to make this conference a success. We'll have an opportunity to recognize them all, all of them individually this week, but please join me in thanking them for helping put this conference together this week. And lastly from me, and I'll hush and get off the stage, I'd also like to give a shout out this morning to our members of ECP, our early career professionals. This is a group that was formed a number of years ago for individuals in our organization who are either under 40 years of age or have less than 10 years of service in the courts to help them get connected with our court community. A number of them have embarked upon the ECP Challenge. We are looking forward to their work, but if someone comes up to you and asks you a very strange question or asks for something off of your clothing, please just oblige and give it to them within reason. We're looking forward to seeing on Thursday who is the winner of the challenge, but thank you, ECP, for you being here this year and for your work. At this time, we have a very special presentation. I'll ask Carl Thomas to come to the podium to make the Award of Merit presentation.
Good morning and welcome to Scottsdale. This association and this profession have given me so many cool opportunities, and this is one of the fun ones. This is one of the great ones. As many of you know, the Award of Merit is NACM's highest individual award, granted over the years to a handful of recipients whose contributions to the field are truly remarkable and outstanding. The nominees this year were no different. I happen to be from South Dakota, and so it crossed my mind that if we had a Mount Rushmore for court administration, some of the recipients of the Award of Merit would have their faces carved in stone, perhaps on the Thurgood Marshall Building in Washington, D.C. This year's recipient is certainly one of those. For many of us, the profession of court management is a given. It's already a well-developed career path, an established field. But we forget that just a few decades ago, this was not the case. Just a few decades ago, this Award of Merit recipient was one of the pioneers who gave this field of work a sense of purpose and clarity and identity. And today, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to find anyone in court management who is not touched by this recipient's lifetime of service in some way. If you're one of the attorneys in this room, this recipient was a director in court administration with the American Bar Association. If you're a federal court employee, this recipient served as an early director of the United States Administrative Office of the Courts. If you're a state or local court manager, this recipient pioneered some of pioneered some of the first organized projects and studies in case flow. If you're a judge or administrator who spent any time at the National Judicial College, this recipient was the first dean of the National Judicial College and one of its builders. If you're one of the Institute for Court Management fellows or students in the room, he authored one of the very first books on court administration and management and was the first director of the Institute for Court Management. And those of us who've gone through that program will always fondly remember the line, and I can't do this very well, but, and those are the purposes of the courts. Over the course of his career, this recipient served as an officer in the Marine Corps, an attorney in private practice, an attorney at the Justice Department, an assistant attorney general, a professor of law or dean at multiple law schools, and has consulted in enough countries internationally, I'm sure, to fill every page of a passport. I'll be honest, I knew, and probably most of you would know, this recipient was a big deal in this profession long before his nomination for this award. I understood that while I was still playing with Matchbox cars, he helped pioneer a sense of our work as a necessary and distinct profession in the first place. But as his multiple nominations and letters of support from justices, judges, friends, and colleagues poured in from across the nation, I came to fully appreciate his lifetime of service to the courts in general, to his friends and colleagues and students and comrades in this field, and ultimately to the people of this nation and others around the world who have entrusted us with the management of their courts, and ultimately with the profound and humbling responsibility of delivering justice in every case. It's not an idle compliment or flattery, I think, to say that without this recipient's lifetime of service, our field would simply not be what it is, if it existed as a field at all. And so on behalf of the National Association for Court Management, it is my great honor and privilege to announce that the 2014 recipient of the Award of Merit is our professor, our colleague, our elder statesman, our mentor, our friend, Ernest C. Friesen, Jr. Ernie, will you please join me?
After hearing that marvelous introduction, I would come to the conclusion that the person couldn't keep a job. Also the possibility that I'm very old, which is also true. First thing to go was my memory, and the second was my voice. And so tonight you'll have to struggle with me a bit as I try to speak for a few minutes. I've been limited, certainly by the program, to saying just a few comments that I hope are relevant to what's going on here. The thing that always comes to mind when somebody talks about the future is that famous comment on the archives of the United States that the past is prologue. So I come in today to be an historian of a lot of things that came about in the process of bringing you here. Court management did not spring out of necessity. As a matter of fact, when I started studying court administration, court administrators were thought of as bag carriers. They went with the Chief Justice to meetings and carried their bag. No one would for a moment suggest that today. So what that illustrates, of course, is that the prediction of great things for the future in court management are almost proven to be valid. But I'd like to talk a little bit about some of that history, as well as thank NACM and the people of NACM for all the things that have happened. Last night, I walked around the room, and I counted 14 people to whom I am indebted for the things that I've learned about court management. Most of them gave me the opportunity to be in their courts and to do what I love to do most, which is research what works and what doesn't work. And I think it's worthwhile at a meeting that's looking to the future to talk about a little bit about the process by which we got where we are. I was at the meeting in 1985 when they merged two organizations. I thought there would probably be very few people here, but I counted 10 people that were at that meeting that are here, and there are probably more. But the two organizations were interesting. One of them was the court administrators, mostly of the traffic and lower jurisdiction courts. The other one was the organization of court administrators in trial courts of general jurisdiction. And they worried about whether they had anything in common. They worried about whether joining the two organizations together would make one of them less emphasized. Here's a fact that may not be known, but the court administrators from what I'll call the special court jurisdiction courts were far ahead of the general jurisdiction judges, or court administrators. Why was that? Well, in the mid-1950s, first historical fact, about 1955, the American Bar Association created the Traffic Court Committee. And the traffic courts had studied the management and had arranged them to work better, basically to get rid of corruption. But the court administration was much more highly developed there. Clerks dealt with many, many things that no one would have imagined that clerks could do in the courts of general jurisdiction. So the merger there was one of apprehension. It's proved to be wrong because both of those groups have influenced each other and made the system better. Things we have learned from all of that. But I think I would go back a little further, back to the day when court administrators were called bag carriers. In 1967, I was working in the Department of Justice with a staff member of the Committee for the Administration of Justice. And we looked at the federal courts and said, there's no administrative structure to deal with the problems of the courts, federal courts at that time. The power of administration in the federal courts then and now is in the circuit councils. The administrative superintendence of the courts is there, not in the Judicial Conference of the United States, and not in the Chief Justice. And yet there was no staff aimed at that. So we proposed and persuaded the Congress to pass a Court Executive Act. This becomes important because when Warren Burger became Chief Justice, he looked at that and said, I happened to be the administrator of the federal courts at the time. He said to me, where do we get these executives? I said, well, there are probably 30 professionals in the courts of the United States today, 19 69, probably 30 professionals. If you hired all of them for the 12 circuits, you would deprive the states of the ones that now are there. And he thought a little while. He consulted some of his friends, and then he made a speech. It said, what we need is a program to develop court executives. He gave a speech to the American Judicial Society, and to make a long story short, Ford Foundation put up $1 million, which in those days was unimaginable, to start an institute for court management. And when he asked me who we might get to run it, I said, well, why don't you let me do it? And he may have been glad to get rid of me, I don't know. But he endorsed the idea. He persuaded former Attorney General of the United States, the man who made Eisenhower president, Herb Brownell, to be chairman of the committee. That opened up doors all over the place. But the most important thing that happened for purposes of this group today is he was able to introduce all of us involved in that to a man named Jim Webb. Most of you won't remember that name. There was a senator from Virginia by that name. It's not the same person. Jim Webb was the head of NASA that organized to put a man on the moon. That wouldn't have been successful for Jim Webb, an Oklahoma lawyer gone to Washington. He was a magnificent public administrator. He formed, or persuaded other people to form, the National Academy of Public Administration. And he got the National Academy, the American Bar Association, others to support us as we designed the Institute for Court Management. And that's what I want to get to just for a minute. What did ICM include? Well, with a group of people taken from social sciences, the law, and public administration, we ended up saying there are 3 things these new administrators need to understand and do. One, they need the skills: human resources, budgeting, information systems, jury management. They need those skills. We had 5 of them that were quite inclusive. They need to understand the environment, and that's a key word. They need to understand the scope of the courts, how broadly they go. And we were able to identify 4 basic environments. I won't go over those today. And finally, and this is why I'm making this talk, we said court administrators need to understand research. Everybody at ICM has to do a research project. They have to come away understanding the basic fundamentals of finding the truth in a public administration forum. And I think that by itself was the greatest contribution of that group of people that came together. So I'm suggesting to you today, as you develop a blueprint for the future, that you include skills to meet new challenges, a new age, that you recognize that the environments are different. You're going into new environments. The social sciences become more and more relevant every day. Probation and parole, which were sort of on the side, are now in the middle of court administration. Social services for families are right in the middle of it. If they don't work, then the remedies the courts give don't work. And the courts are about remedies. But it's gone well beyond that. We need to understand what those new environments are and how those people think. You have to walk in their shoes to work with them. You have to collaborate. That's the heart of it. But finally, we don't know the truth about a lot of things. I don't know how to deal with that other than to say that the famous philosopher, Will Rogers, said, it isn't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that isn't true. If you think about that, every time you take on something new, you have to say, how can we figure out the right way? What's the experiment we can do? That's how I got into court administration. I started studying the pretrial conference in 1958 with a grant from the Ford Foundation. And I went out and I watched 35 different judges do pretrial conferences. I recorded and studied 300 pretrial conferences. The one revelation that came out of that research that's still here, I think, that blesses us all, is that the pretrial conference is not a conference, it's a process. That's the origin of case management. Pretrial is a process, not just a conference. It's what all the things you do to make things happen. That was a product of research. And we have it today because of that. And I think it is readily accepted. You know I could go on for another hour or two. I won't, except to say thank you very much to NACM for this. I feel terribly pleased to be included in your time. And the idea that you're going to develop a blueprint reminds me of Yogi Berra's famous statement. He says, if you don't know where you're going, when you get there, you'll be someplace else. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ernie. Good morning. My name is Michelle Oken, and I am the president-elect of NACM and also the conference chair. NACM is committed to giving back to the communities that host our conferences, and in Scottsdale, we have an opportunity to make a difference. The early career professionals are sponsoring a NACM professional clothing drive to benefit the probationers and GED students served by the Garfield House, an organization which provides adult basic education, GED preparation, English for speakers of other languages, and job skill classes. Conference attendees have been asked to donate new or gently used men's and women's professional clothing. You may drop off clothes at the registration desk. If you are so inclined to go shopping in Scottsdale, you can check out some Goodwill, Salvation Army, or gently used clothing stores. And Garfield House address is also available at the registration desk if you wish to mail items following the conference. Special thanks to Maricopa County Superior Court for assisting in the creation and production of a video on the Garfield House, which we will be showing today at our business meeting luncheon. Fast forward 25 years. As we plan for the future, what will the courts look like? World leader and visionary Mahatma Gandhi believed the future depends on what you do today. Embracing the courts of the future was selected by this year's Conference Development Committee as the theme for the mid-year and annual conferences. This conference will focus on creating a blueprint for action. Today's theme, From Traditionals to Millennials and Beyond, takes a close look at generational differences and challenges. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, more than 40 million baby boomers reached the age of 65 by the end of 2010. And by 2018, almost 80% of the workforce will be over the age of 50. At the end of the spectrum, millennials are obtaining positions with managerial responsibility and authority in the courts. And we're seeing Gen 2020, those born after 1994, becoming a part of the court workforce. Additionally, court leaders must be prepared to address expectations of young and old alike as they seek court services and as our diverse employment base delivers these services. We need to identify best practices and strategize to accommodate the differing needs and values. How do we motivate our many-faceted workforce and our developing and emerging leaders? What functions have become out of date in the justice system, and how do we refresh them in light of the varying generations? Seth Mattison will provide us answers and insight in his keynote address, NextGen at Work, bringing out the best in every generation. Tomorrow, we will take a closer look at collaborative leadership partnership in motion. Mary McQueen, president of the National Center for State Courts, will deliver the keynote address, Productive Pairs, Lessons from the ARC. Tomorrow's workshop sessions are designed to benefit both leader judges and court managers. A key determinant of successful, high-performing courts is the relationship between judge and administrator teams at the top of the hierarchy and throughout the court. How should responsibilities and duties be divided? Teamwork among administrative judges and court managers is the secret sauce that permits diverse skill sets to complement one another in a productive, supportive, and trusting environment. The ability of courts to increase, develop, and nurture collaborative partnerships is essential to the future of court leadership. And finally, on Thursday, when we fast forward 25 years, how will court leadership skillfully manage many ideals, one goal, justice, to enable court users to obtain justice and simultaneously provide timely, fair, and impartial justice? How will courts communicate and encompass the purposes of courts into a consistent message to our multi-generational, multicultural society? How will courts define their purpose in the face of increasing language barriers, immigration issues, and elder issues that may surface as a result of an aging baby boomer generation? The thought of justice and the role courts play will inevitably change as individuals access self-help resources, technology, and applications for legal advice. The roadmap defining the future of courts will begin its journey with keynote speaker Michael Roosevelt providing his view on many ideals, one goal, justice. All of these critical areas scratch only the surface in our rapidly changing court environment. Future planning is key to the health of our courts and profession, but how do we go about creating a blueprint for moving forward? After exploring the view from 10,000 feet at the mid-year conference in Savannah, Georgia, we encourage you to participate as we create a blueprint for action here in Scottsdale. It is now my pleasure to introduce the sponsor of this morning's plenary session, CourtView Justice Solutions, Kevin Beatty, President and General Manager. Thank you.
Good morning. Just a few short words, and then we really will get the conference going. Again, as she said, my name is Kevin Beatty with CourtView, and we're very pleased and proud to again be able to partner with the National Center in bringing a very informative keynote session to the conference. Seth Mattison, the founder of Future Sight Labs, has built a practice around looking at the generational dynamics and the workforce trends across many organizations. And one of the things that we found to be most interesting about that is that it is not independent. This is not some independent variable that doesn't affect us or just one piece of our work. It transcends all of that because it's intimately tied to how we interact every day. Every day we're working with our key stakeholders to leverage technology to do better, to be more efficient, to do more with less. Every day we're working with those stakeholders, which include the judges, the court managers, the technology teams, the public, the bar. All of those are part of what we do every day, and this is important to that. Understanding these generational differences does not change those challenges that we face. It doesn't take them away, but a better understanding of those can make it easier in how we approach those challenges. Similarly, the workforce trends, that doesn't change our priorities, but it might affect how we balance those priorities. We are no longer in a single dimension or a single plane of our stakeholders where everybody interacts in the same way. The chief mentioned earlier about some e-filing initiatives or time standards. There was a time when we could all talk in that single plane and all understand and communicate the same way. But now there's a different plane, there's a different vertical that I think is being brought into place by these generational differences. And it's those differences that will cause us to look differently at how we communicate with those stakeholders. Seth has some real interesting insights into how we can channel those differences to get more of the good for our organizations out of that. And if you would please join me on behalf of the National Center and NACM, welcome Seth Mattison.
I had a thought occurred to me last night as I was preparing. I'm used to most of my groups being able to Google me while I'm on stage, and I just realized this will be maybe the first time my audience could actually have the ability to look my records up while I'm on stage. Don't worry, Michelle, there's nothing to worry about. They're not going to find anything. Conference committee. No. Welcome, and thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. This is such a special event. I've spent a fair amount of time leading up to today preparing to understand your world. The conference committee was kind enough to invest time with me on the front end. Courtview was kind enough to invest time with me on the front end to understand your world. Had a chance to meet a number of you last night. For those of you that I have not had a chance to meet yet and are thinking, this guy looks like the same age as my knucklehead kid. Like, what is he going to tell us? And that's okay. I can see it on your face. I'm used to it at this point. What I usually tell people is I've been studying generational dynamics, generational theory for a long time. Started very early in my life. In fact, some people jokingly say I was born to do this work. You see, I was born on a fourth-generation farm in southern Minnesota. So I grew up working alongside my father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather. Now, my great-grandfather was born in 1910. So he was around to see the impacts of World War I, the stock market crash, Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War. He was a history buff, and he was a storyteller, and he was a pretty remarkable individual to get to grow up around. Now, did anybody else grow up on a farm? Are there any other farm kids out here? Okay, so there's a few of you. Fantastic. So for all of you city kids, what you need to know is just how much time you spend in one of these growing up on a farm. So again, city kids, this is a tractor, right? This is called a tractor. And we spend an enormous amount of time in this vehicle. This is what you use to pull an implement to get the ground ready, to plant the seeds, to harvest, right? It doesn't just magically show up in our supermarkets. Now for me, from the time I was about 3 until I was about 6, I sat literally right in the corner of this cab, right there, tucked in. God bless my mother's heart. She thought it was a smart move to leave me home alone with these 3 maniacs instead of just going to daycare. And fortunately, I survived. But it was a pretty remarkable experience. Now, for me, this tractor cab was actually a classroom filled with history lessons and stories of past generations. And I'm just old enough to have been around before iPhones and iPads and mobile devices, so there wasn't a screen they could stick in front of me. So again, for me, it was this classroom. And it was a pretty remarkable way to grow up. And I like to show this picture for 2 reasons. One, I like to give you a little perspective, a little insight on who's standing here in front of you. I'm not just this individual in a suit. If you really want to know who I am at my core, that image pretty much sums it up. Now, the second reason I like to put that up there is for me, because when I'm traveling around the world and hanging out with cool clients and staying in amazing properties, it is a reminder to stay grounded to where I came from as well, which is so important for all of us. Now, I learned 2 big lessons coming out of this period of time in my life. The first lesson is I got extremely good at selling 3 generations on getting out of doing chores, right? And I was a pro, which is exactly why I'm here in a suit with you all and not home on the farm, much to my father's dismay. But the second lesson I learned was that each generation has their own unique story, their own unique history. Right? We all have our own individual stories, of course, but we are also a part of a much larger cultural story. And it has always been my mission in life to understand and share these generational stories to help make sense of the cultural shifts we're experiencing, both in society as well as in our organizations. Now, you can't do that without having some perspective of where you've come from. I mean, Ernie, your remarks were so incredible, and it's such a great way to kick a conference off thinking about the future. You can't talk about the future without knowing where you've been in the past. And I can't stand here as someone who's a representation of this new generation without you knowing that I've invested a huge amount of time to have some understanding of where we came from before we can talk about this future. Now, we're throwing around the term generations a lot, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page of what we mean when we talk about these different groups. So one of the ways we define a generation is by age, by birth years. So when we look at this breakdown of the different generations that we have in our organizations, in society today, we see how it breaks down as this. So born prior to 1946, we have our traditionalist generation with a population size here in the U.S. of 75 million. Following the traditionalists, we have the baby boomer generation. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964, population size 80 million. Following boomers, we've got a smaller generation, in Generation X. Xers born between 1965 and 1979, 60 million. And then we've got a larger generation, again, born between 1980 and 1995 in millennials at 80 million. And then we've got this kind of new generation that's creating a little bit of buzz. There's a lot of names and terms being thrown around for this group. No official title has been thrown out there. I think, Michelle, you used Generation 2020. That's absolutely fine. Other people are saying Generation Z, Homeland Generation. Media is throwing a lot of names around now. We're using the term Generation Edge, and I'll explain that in a second, but population size of right around 23 million right now, which is what they're showing. Now, that can grow, and we'll see where the official name lands. But that's the latest generation. Does anybody have kids at home right now born in that 1996 to 2010 range? Wow. Okay, so you have a working laboratory of the next generation, right? So let me ask you this. Should we be excited or totally freaked out? Totally freaked out. And I think probably a little bit of both. I'm actually really, really excited about this new generation. My early predictions and some of the things that we're seeing in focus groups, they're going to have all the tech skills, if not more, of the tech skills of the millennial generation, my generation, because they've literally grown up with a screen since they were 2. You know, for those of you that have 2-year-olds or even grandchildren, they grab your phone, they download apps you don't even know are on your phone, right? You're like, how did I get the Barbie channel on my phone? How did this happen? And you get your credit card bill and you see, right? It's unbelievable. So they have all those tech skills, yet at the same time, because most of them grew up, especially if you think about the last decade, through a little bit more difficult economic period of time, right? 1 in 7 saw one of their parents lose a job. Most of them had older siblings they saw graduate from university, not be able to get into their profession. And so the lesson they learned is that nothing comes for free. You're going to have to work your tail off, right? You're going to take whatever job you can get and at least get started. So couple that with they're primarily Generation Xers kids, and Xers are a pretty incredible, tough, edgy generation. And so I think they're going to have and put a pretty incredible generation out into the world. So I'm excited about them. Now, I always like to get just a little bit of a feel for who's in the room with me on any given morning, just to kind of get a little pulse. So if you're willing to admit it, and if you want to bump down a generation, that's absolutely fine. Just don't be calling each other out, but we're here to celebrate the generations. We want to celebrate you. So if we have any traditionalists, will you stand up so that we can honor you? Do we have any traditionalists? Any traditionalists with us? Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Baby boomers, where are my baby boomers? Baby boomers, stand up and celebrate yourselves. Hey-o. Okay, baby boomers, okay. Boomers never have a problem cheering for yourselves, ever. It's just like unbelievable. Generation X, where are my Xers at? Xers, stand up, but let's celebrate yourselves. Wow, look we got a great group of Xers. Now, that wasn't bad. Normally, I have to tell you, Xers, the applause volume, it's like Xers stand up and boomers are like, whatever for the Xers. Can't get any love, can you, Xers? Brutal. How about millennials, Generation Y? We got some millennials in the room? Hey-o. Love it. So, as I'm thinking about your theme, embracing the courts of the future and blueprints for action, I've been thinking about this for the past couple weeks leading up to this event, thinking about the future of this profession, your future. And one statistic kept running around in my head. Michelle rattled off a couple of great statistics as well. But one that really stood out to me is we're predicting by 2020, 50% of the workforce will be made up of the millennial generation. 50%. That's a huge number. And I think 2020 for a long time felt like this very far off, futuristic number in space, right? 2020, we'll worry about it when it gets here. I can't think about that right now. But the reality of it is that's only 5.5 years away. It's a blink of an eye. And so as we think about, we've got this huge group of baby boomers that are thinking about retiring. But the baby boomers I talk to, in many cases, there's interesting trends playing out there too. In some cases, they're saying, after the economic collapse in 2008, I can't afford to retire. I'm going to have to work longer than I thought I was going to. Or I talk to other boomers who are like, I'm as healthy and as active as I've ever been. I have no desire to start gardening and do woodworking for the rest of my life. I'm fully engaged. I'm not going anywhere. And so I think you have to then consider the implications of a large group of, extremely talented individuals, a generation that has all of this wisdom, knowledge, and perspective that we don't want to see walk out the door. But what if they do stay? And we've got 50%, this huge wave of millennials coming in that are going to want a seat at the table. They're going to want to vie for leadership positions. Well, you got to get your arms around that if we're going to think about the future of this profession. Now, in 2009, I had the incredible opportunity to collaborate on a bestseller called The M Factor, How the Millennial Generation is Rocking the Workplace. And my two author partners, David Stillman and Lynn Lancaster, were my mentors and guides. And we explored, at the time, we identified 7 key trends that we saw this new generation coming in to impact the workplace. And since 2009, for the past 5 years, I've been so blessed to travel around the world and work with, some of the top players in almost every single industry to see how these trends are playing out. And I've made an interesting discovery. What I found out along the way, and this is a lot of time and energy, in interviewing one-on-one hundreds of individuals every single year, is that the 7 trends that we thought would be so impactful have turned out to almost just be scratching the surface to what has become what I will call this much larger mega shift impacting all of the generations. And no one is talking about it. It's unbelievable. And so I have literally devoted the last year of my life to understanding this shift amongst the generations. And what I want to do with our time first this morning, we've got about 40 minutes. I'm going to bring to life this larger shift that's impacting every single one of the generations, all of us, that we have to be prepared for, that we have to be aware of, and then we can have some conversations around what it means for our organizations, our culture. And then I'm going to do a breakout following, and we'll go more deep dive into things happening with each one of the generations. And we'll make it very interactive. You can ask questions. It'll be Q&A. But for this opening, I want to tell the story of this shift that I've been watching play out for the last 5 years. So to bring some life to this story, I want us to think about the larger kind of collective story we all bring with us into our organizations, into our work life as we think about the future of work. Now, I would say it's probably a pretty safe bet that anybody in this room who's been working for, say, 10 to 15 years, if you've been in the workplace for that long, 10 to 15 years plus, it's pretty safe to say that as a whole, most of you grew up in much more of a military-based modeled view of the world, much more top-down command and control, right? A world where whether it was your father or the boss, if they said jump, you said Very good. Look at you know that. If they said jump, you said how high. This was not a debate. This was not a discussion. And we were all on the same page. You all knew the answer to that question. And I think if we had an image to represent this world, this view of the world, I think that image would be this. I think it would be this. Now here's the thing. This image represents so much more than just an org chart. It is literally a view of the world. And it's so ingrained and baked into our DNA that we don't even realize it's there, right? It's so ingrained that it shows up in unexpected places, almost subconscious places for us in our lives. It shows up when we say things like, without even thinking about it, we'll say things like, oh, the higher-ups will be attending that meeting. Or we need to communicate that information down. Or she really worked her way up. Or we'll use terms like top brass. It's like, well, where does that come from? We're literally living in this world. And with that comes a whole list of what I'll call unwritten rules that we've all agreed to play by when living in this world. Whole list of unwritten rules that we've all learned. If you think back, I want you to think back in your own mind. Go back to your first job. Maybe you were 16 working at a grocery store or a teller at a bank or doing manual labor. Or maybe think about your first job coming out of university, your first professional job. And I want you to think about some of the early rules that you learned. I want you to think about the answer to this question. What's one thing you learned early on about how to play by these rules? Because you know there's a whole list of unwritten rules. What's one thing that you learned early on about how to play by these rules? And we're going to do a little interaction here. At your tables, I want you to just go around, and I want everybody to just maybe mention one or two unwritten rules that you learned very early on, whether it's in your current position or a summer job that you had, an early rule that you learned. And I'm going to give you two examples just to kind of get your creative thinking going. So I do this with every one of my groups. This is one of my favorite moments in the program. We're going to do a debrief, and we'll hear some comments. Two that I've recently heard. I had an incredible boomer woman leader last week at a session. She was like, okay, so one of the rules I learned early on, one of my first jobs, Fortune 100 company, they're taking us on a tour. We're in the lobby of this immaculate headquarters, and the tour guide stops us, and she says, you see those elevators over there? These beautiful, ornate elevators? Those are the executive elevators. You are never to use those elevators. If you should happen to accidentally find yourself in one of those elevators, you do not talk to anyone. Okay? Are we clear? Beautiful, perfect. It's like, okay, I get the rule. That's one. Another one. I had a gentleman who worked for one of the big four accounting firms. We chose to omit the name, but grew up in the accounting space, one of the big four. And he said literally on his first week, this is back in the early 90s, he shows up and he's wearing, he's like the typical 90s kind of suit. The guy's got matching suspenders with the tie, the whole 9 yards. He's got this, hardline manager rolls up to him and is like, hey, buddy, lose the suspenders. You can only wear suspenders around here after you've been here for 4 years. Once you're a real player, you can't wear suspenders otherwise. Lose it. It's like, are you serious? Like literally made him take the suspenders off right then and there. Right? Establishing the rank and file in the order. So these are just, some of the cultural unwritten rules, but you know more of them. So I want you to take 2-3 quick minutes, go around the table. What are some of the unwritten rules that you learned early on? And then we'll do a debrief. Go ahead. Take about one more minute, and then we're going to do a little debrief. 1 more minute. So much, yeah. No. If it's not an easy fix, we won't worry about it. It's not. I just noticed it and again thought it was
Yeah,
like.
I did too. As soon as that came up, I said, oh, when your tractor picture came up, I said, I hope that's the picture. But it wasn't, so. Okay, let me go. Oh, shit, sorry about
Here,
that.
no.
Let me go switch back.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's come back. So I heard some great stories in passing. Now, I always like to ask for volunteers, but if you prefer to pick on someone at your table, I like that too. We can point the person out who had a great story. I already see fingers pointing. Thank you, right there. So, we're going to get a couple of volunteers. What's the one rule that you learned early on? You just volunteered. Someone at this table. Who do you want me to hand the microphone to? Please be brave. Tell us, what's your name, where are you from, and what's the rule you learned? Please. Hi. 1 second. Can we bring that microphone up if we can? Volume. Try it again. It should be on. Give it another whirl.
Hi.
Yes. First of all, can we give her a round of applause for being brave? Yes.
That's Aurora over there from Texas calling me out like that. That's not right, but
That's not right.
My name's Julie Zawanage. I'm from LA. LA Superior Court, and one of the rules we were talking about is in our generation, it was like always watch out for the higher ups. Don't let them. Put your head down.
But you don't want
to
to be. Make sure
be
you're working hard. Looks like you're working hard.
Don't talk. Be quiet. Got to look busy. And the millennium generation, they're totally different.
When you walk by, do they have put their head down and
No,
look like they're working
they don't.
hard? They're like,
No.
hey, what's going on?
They're on their phone. They don't care.
Annoying. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you. Who's got another good one? Right here? Oh, fantastic. This one? This one.
Hi, I'm Charlotte from Houston Municipal Courts. And one of the first ones we came up with was the customer is always right. When we first started working, you didn't argue with the customer. They were right. And so that was one. And then the other one was follow your chain of command.
Ooh, follow the chain of command. How many of you knew that rule early on? Follow the chain of command. Don't jump the hierarchy, so to speak, right? We all learned that rule. Now I always like to play a little bit of devil's advocate. We can cut this microphone for now. A little bit of devil's advocate on that one, and I'll say, okay, let's just pretend that I have no idea what you mean by that. Don't go above your boss's head, so to speak. Does that mean don't go above your boss's head if, you have a great idea? Don't go above my boss's head if I want to complain about you? What do you mean by that? Just ever? Just ever? Anytime? What if you just think, he's a really cool dude or she's a really cool lady, though, and you just want to hang out with them? What about then? No, they're never cool and fun, or just no, you still don't get to hang out with them? See, that's so interesting because I was just at an event where we had captains of the distribution space, and the presenter before me, CEO of a $4 billion distribution company, and he's like, we've got all of our summer interns are here right now, And I've got 22 and 23-year-olds rolling into my office asking if I want to have coffee. I said, what? I said, yeah, it's like they just roll into my office asking if I want to have coffee. And I said to the group, how many of you at that age would have just rolled into the CEO's office and asked to have coffee or hang out? Gentleman in the back of the room is like, I wouldn't do that now. You all know this rule. Now, there's a whole bunch of other rules that you know that we didn't even say. And I know one of them that we often don't say is, the rule, make your boss look good. Well, you didn't say that one because you're probably sitting next to your boss right now. But you knew that rule. Now, you all get this. And then we scratch our head and we're like, why does this next generation, why do they not get it? Why don't they get it? The reason they don't get it is because for most of you, even if I had just said, in your mind, I want you to visualize your organization, where you sit, who you report to, even if you didn't draw this exact org chart, you would be envisioning some sort of a hierarchical structure. And if we asked this younger generation in their mind to visualize their organization, and we pulled that image out of their mind, you know what they would see? It looked like this. Did someone say a constellation? You said a constellation. Brilliant. They see a network. They see an interconnected web of people and talent, ideas, and information. They see, in essence, the internet, a physical manifestation of the virtual world of the web they've grown up in. This is what they see. Now, if we're thinking about the future, we've got to get our arms around, well, what are the implications of this and what does this mean? We've got to understand it. Because we understand where the org chart view of the world comes from, but where does this world view come from? Well, there's two big influences. The first is there was this major shift that happened amongst parents. A dynamic change in parenting. Baby boomers and Generation Xers have set out to reinvent the parent-child relationship. Most boomers we talk to, and Xers as well, they'll say, I love my parents, don't get me wrong, but I hated growing up in an environment where it was a my way or the highway type place, right? For most of you, your father was the most scary person in your world, right? He could literally end your world. Not for us, right? Not for us. This was about partnering. And it's not a values-based judgment. It became, we're going to partner, we're going to have adult conversations. We're going to sit down together. If I came home late, right, we sat around the table, we discussed, we took a vote, and decided as a family as to how I should be punished. This was a democracy. How many of you grew up in a dictatorship? Right? This generation, they've also been the chief technology officer in the home since they were 12 years old. How many of you have a CTO in your house and it is not you? Am I right? Now, we laugh and we joke about this, but I want you to think about the implications of this. What that means is that for their entire life, almost their entire life, they have been teaching the adults in their lives how to do things. Right? I've been teaching the adults in my world how to do things. If you think about, for most of you, the world that you grew up in, children with adults, that dynamic, and even young people to adults, information would flow down. Wisdom would be bestowed down. Whether it was in society, in your personal lives, and especially in the professional world. But all they've known is, whether it's my grandparents or my parents, every adult in my life, there's usually something that I'm showing them how to do, I'm helping them with. Have also instilled in their mind, go do something that you care about, do something you're passionate about. If you're going to work as long and as hard as I have, made all these sacrifices, do something that matters, and know that you have a voice. Powerful message. So they've got this on one side of them, and on the other side, the other big influence, I said two influences, the other big influence, the unlocking of the internet and the power of social media. All right? The unlocking of the internet and the power of social media. For the first time in the history of the world, we are truly connected. Never seen this before, right? Everyone in this room, we are digital immigrants to this new world. That means you knew life before the internet. How many of you can remember life before the internet? Can we all just agree what a terrible place that was, first of all? Right? What an awful place. But this new generation, they are digital natives. They've never known a world without being truly connected. So what are the implications of a truly connected world? Well, let's go back in history to 1963 and take a look at what we once thought was possible if only we had greater connection to one another. And let's have some volume on this if we can. Make sure it's up on mine.
I am not referring to the absolute, infinite concept of universal peace and goodwill, of which some fantasies and fanatics dream. Let us focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace. This will require a new effort, a new context for world discussions. It will require increased understanding, and increased understanding will require increased contact. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests. Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal.
You know, I can't help but wonder what Kennedy would think if he could see the tools we have available at our fingertips today. The responsibility that he would say to us as people to take hold of, given these tools. Now, thinking about it, what does that then mean for this generation? How many of you have been watching CNN's special, The 60s? Have you been watching this? So it's an incredible series. If you haven't watched it, they're rerunning it all the time. They're basically highlighting big events. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Movement, JFK, Vietnam War, TV, rock and roll. One of my favorite segments is on the television, and Tom Hanks is one of the executive producers. And he has this remarkable line in the documentary. Tom Hanks, when he's talking about television, he says, you know, what this did, television, he said, for the very first time, what TV did is it allowed the American people to see the American people. For the very first time. You see, up until that point, we really didn't know that much about each other. We didn't have the ability to see into each other's lives, these things that were happening all over the country. So for baby boomers, television, it really did represent, now you were able to have some perspective and some understanding. You could see each other. The internet is doing that for this new generation on a global scale. For the first time, they are able to see each other around the world, and they don't think anything of it. I'm home hanging out with my 7-year-old niece, Cadence, recently, and she's literally online Skyping with friends in Russia that are like a part of this class, and they're just like chatting and hanging out, and afterwards I said to her, isn't that amazing? Isn't that so cool that you have like friends in Russia? And she's like, why? She was like so perplexed that I thought it was unbelievably fascinating. This was her world. So you have these two influences shaping them in two big ways. It's their parents have given them a voice. Social media and the internet literally gave them a megaphone. And with that megaphone have created social change. Can we go back to my slides, or are they zapped? If possible. If not, that's fine. We'll roll without them. So there's this really cool image of a Time magazine cover that comes up right now. It's the cover of Time magazine from 2011 of the Arab Spring. There it is. Generation changing the world. Right? The Arab uprising. How many of you remember this happening now? This is like 3 years ago. This is a movement, a revolution sparked by teenagers, by young people, creating change in a culture in a part of the world we never thought was possible. And what was the message that was spread around the world from these young people, from these events? The message was, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And if you think that a 22-year-old who is now 25 or 26 did not see those events in 2011 and thought to themselves, influenced and thought, if they could do that there, how could I not show up inside your institution and not be able to influence one policy or improve one process? They were able to overthrow their leader. I'm just trying to have a seat at the table to make one small impact. Of course they were. But how does it come across? What an entitled generation. Who do you think you are? No one even knew my name until I had been here for 15 years. And now you want to have a seat at the table? You got to pay your dues, pal. And it immediately creates that mindset of entitlement. This is what they saw. Now, they also took these tools and launched disruptive technology in every single space. They're seeing kids their age turn down billion-dollar deals and disrupt industries. Again, the mindset is, and think about this, it's not that other generations haven't had young prodigies. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates were very young when they brought those inventions into the world. But here's the difference. Boomers, especially boomers, go back. And when you were 20s, early 20s, how many people your age did you see on the cover of a business publication? On the cover of a business publication. Now I want you to think about when you walk by, a newsstand at the airport or your Barnes & Nobles and see how many young people are on the cover of magazines. It's totally reshaped it. So again, from the standpoint of I'm empowered, I can have a voice, I can make an impact, and I see the world like this shows up. And just like the hierarchy, just like the org chart, there's a whole list of unwritten rules for this world as well. Whole list of unwritten rules that have been agreed to be played by in this world. What do you think some of those might be? I mean, you could even call them some of the unwritten rules of the internet. What goes? How about around, information, access to information, limitless connection? Anyone is accessible. I can tweet the President of the United States. There are no barriers. How about the idea that anyone can have a great idea? Does the internet care if you are 16 or 66? Does the internet care? No. All that matters is the product viable? Is it a good idea? Meritocracy, it stands on its own. A 16-year-old just created an app that reveals campaign financing for candidates. A 16-year-old is influencing political outcomes and he can't even vote. It's unbelievable. The world looks like this. Now, here's the trick, though. This is the future that we're talking about, but the reality is we still live in a very complex world. Because this isn't just influencing inside our organizations, it's reshaping the marketplace. Right? We now have access to each other as well. The barriers that have separated us are now starting to crumble. I'll give you a great example with CourtView, our sponsor for this session. So I had a chance to spend some time with them before coming, and we talked about this transformation and how it's impacting the marketplace with both Sue Humphreys and Kevin Bade. And we talked about this very thing. And Sue said, today it's not just about laying out some generic offerings to clients anymore. You have to closely collaborate with one another to ensure we're meeting the changing demands. Because is your world constantly changing, yes or no? It's constantly changing, yes or no? Yes, of course. So they can't just roll up with the same old, same old. And how can they then stay on top of these changes? And that's what I asked her. How do you keep a pulse on these changes? Whether it's changes in the law or changes in processes. And Sue said, you have to be willing to invest real time with people to understand these dynamics, whether that's observing on site after an implementation or through discussion forums on our website where users engage in discussions on how these tools are working and being used, what's working and what's not. We learn, adjust, and build together. It can no longer be this separation. The lines that have historically separated us are now dissolving. We are moving headlong towards this brave new world. Whether we like it or not, we can't stop it. Because technology. But the challenge that most of us face is the fact that the structure of our older world, the structure of the hierarchy, still exists. And there is this incredible tension, this almost resistance that exists between these two views, and most of us are completely unaware of it. We are living in a half-changed world. Gang, this is the shift. And so often I find we're up here talking about whether or not we should allow access to Facebook or have mobile. You know, the discussion is here on the surface, and this fundamental shift is happening below us. Now, every single culture is having to define what this means for them. On top of that, every single individual in this room right now is defining what this means for you. To be a part of a movement that will lead us into the future and be great at this, you're going to have to do some redefining. You're going to have to think about, what do you have the power to transform? Because here's where everyone finds themselves. You can look at this and you can say, because you have a choice, we're going to choose to stay in the model on the right, the view of the world on the right. We're going to stay there. You can make that choice, and there's probably a whole laundry list of very good reasons to stay there. And we have some clients that are saying that. We have others who are literally saying, you know what? We're going headlong into this new world. We're literally blowing up the org chart, and we're stepping forward into this new world. Most, however, though, believe that it has to be some sort of a hybrid. It cannot be an out with the old, in with the new type world. And this works. This is great. You maintain, maybe you want to maintain an org chart, a hierarchical structure for authority, accountability, disseminating certain pieces of responsibility. But you say, we want to incorporate more of that informal network for communication and collaboration. And that then exists kind of behind the scenes, and that's great. But if you do that and you say that and you choose this, then you have to have a real, honest discussion about your culture and to say, can this really exist if we still live by an unwritten rule such as don't go above your boss's head? Which every single person in this room, we raised our hand and we said, yes, we know that. So then if we say, we're going to incorporate this, we're going to be super transparent or open collaboration, but what we're really saying is that can all happen just below me. I love it if that happens, but it just has to happen below me, right? And we just keep kind of pushing that down, and then we're kidding ourselves. And I just so want to encourage you to have an honest conversation with yourself and with your leadership teams about where do we stand in this and what world do we want to live in. Because again, it's not about out with the old, in with the new, but this is impacting all of us. And it's not just impacting how we structure our institutions. It's impacting our policies, our procedures, our etiquette, how we treat and approach one another, how we communicate. It's all of this. Now, I want to arm you with 3 very specific strategies to start to step forward into this new world that doesn't require you, because I know sometimes I'll have people say, dude, I am in no position to restructure our organizational chart. I don't have that power. And so then we feel a little bit like I can't do anything. But there are some things that you can do, that you can choose to do amongst your teams, right? Amongst the people that you're interacting with. So I want to give you 3 specific tips. Number 1, shine a light on the unwritten rules of the hierarchy of your culture. Shine a light on the unwritten rules of the hierarchy of your culture. Write these down, because this is what I want you, this is what you got to take back. This is going to be your homework. Have an honest conversation. Do we have some policies in place, some procedures in place from 1973 that, if we're honest with ourselves, no longer serve us? Well, you can also say, Seth, we've got policies in place from 1960 that, let me tell you what, sir, they still serve us fine. They work today, they're valid, and they're important to us. And I would say, that's great. You very well might have that. And you might say it's important for us to have a rule like don't go above your boss's head. We want to maintain control of information, and that's great, but you better have an honest conversation about it, and you have to be willing to talk about those, because a 24-year-old that rolls up on your team, they don't know that rule. Shine a light. Secondarily, invite everyone to have a seat at the table. Again, think about this, even just within your group that you work, or you can think about your institution as a whole. You know, the world that we're coming out of historically, the individual at the top basically had the responsibility to come up with all the ideas, see the strategy, set the strategy. It was a group of 3 or 4 behind closed doors, and we disseminate that down. Most of the leaders I talk to today say the world is just changing too fast for me to be able to predict every change, understand every new technology that's coming. I can't do it alone. I've got to tap into what I'd call the collective consciousness of my organization or my team. How do I bring the best ideas forward? It doesn't mean they have to have the final say. It doesn't mean they make the final decisions. But you want to invite those voices to the table. If you're rolling out some new change, you know what? We're trying to serve our clients better in this region or this market or this age demographic. Look around the table and say, do we even have that demographic represented in this room having this conversation right now? Invite every voice to the table. And finally, unleash the power of ownership. Unleash the power of ownership. So I have many leaders will say to me, how do I get this new generation, or any generation for that matter, but particularly this new generation, to not treat this like it's just a job? How do I get them to buy in and give their whole selves to this every single day? Right? Because if they treat it like it's just a job, we recruit them, we get them trained up, and they leave after a year, and we say they're not loyal. First of all, I'll say, if you want them to not treat it like it's a job, you got to make sure that you're not treating it like it's a job. You got to make sure that the managers that you're overseeing, that are dealing with your frontline staff, are not treating it like it's just a job. Right? They're going to listen to your actions more than your words. Second thing you got to do, if you want them to take ownership in their career, you've got to help them take some ownership in their lives, because they are directly correlated. And if you want to help someone take some ownership in their lives, one of the best questions you can ask them or arm them with is, how do you define success? For you personally, how do you define success, young man, young lady? And what are the answers they're going to give you? If they give you something, you know what, I want to be happy, I want to be successful, something like this, it's like, how do you measure that? That's your follow-up question. Whatever the answer is to how you define success, how do you measure that? Because if you can't measure that, how do you know when we've got there? How do we know if we're even getting close? But once you know, when you're thinking about your teams, how they define success, they tell you, this is actually where I'm trying to go with my career. Great, here's how we can measure it. I can now help arm you to do some things. We can now empower them to take ownership over their tasks. Most young people that I talk to, when they say they leave, number one frustration is, more than anything, I'm just flat out bored. I'm bored. Now we can have the mindset of, guess what? Some of those entry-level positions, it's not fun, it's not exciting, but someone's got to do it. You got to pay your dues, so just shut up and do it. But for most of you, you grew up in a world where it was like you didn't have a choice because you had mouths to feed and a mortgage to pay, and so you just did it. But for us, because our parents love us so much, if I don't like this job, I'm going back home, man. There's more food in the refrigerator and a bigger TV. So you're going to have to work with me. So what I tell people is they're always like, the generation wants the corner office right now. They want, the bigger title right now. If you have a frank conversation with most young people, they just say, I want to do some impactful work. I'm just really bored. I just want to get my hands on something juicy. So it doesn't have to be a bump in pay, a bump in title. It can be, can you give them a project outside of their general work scope of tasks to take some ownership over? And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I had an owner of an ad agency recently come up to me, and he's like, after your session, he's like, I was thinking of Katie. Katie's my 25-year-old. This is her. And I just realized one of the things I could give her, I'm so bothered when we bring clients in and our kitchen is a mess. I'm going to give her a budget. I'm going to tell her she owns the kitchen experience and the client experience when they come in. And she loved it. I just checked in with them. That was 3 months ago. She loved it. Because at the end of the day, as we're going to see in this closing commercial, we all know, every single one of us, every generation, you know how you treat things when you own it.
When you own something, you care a little more. Everyone who works at Waitrose owns Waitrose.
So before I came up here, I wrote a note to myself, and I don't do this very often, but sometimes when I get a little nervous, a little excited about a big group, I'll write this note to myself just to kind of help me make sure I know what's important. And the note simply says, love people, serve people, add value, have fun. And as I'm standing here and I'm thinking about your world, this is your world. You wouldn't be here, you wouldn't choose this profession if you didn't care about people. If you didn't want to serve people, if you didn't want to add value in society and for this world. And judging by last night and today, most of you like to have some fun. So my hope is, I hope that you got value out of today's session. And if you didn't, I hope you at least had fun. And I invite you to attend this workshop session with me, where we'll spend about 75 minutes. I'll answer any questions. We'll go deeper into each of the generations. And most importantly, have a little bit of fun. Thanks for an awesome morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I decided I would break the rules on getting on the stage. Let's go ahead and get this started now. So thanks so much, Seth. Thank you all. We're on a break until 10:15. We'll have the concurrent sessions all around. And I just want to remind you, I know some of you are doing it, we do have a Twitter hashtag, NACM2014. Those of you at home that are watching, feel free to tweet us if you have questions. We'll try to get them asked during the breakout sessions. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you throughout the day. Reminder that lunch is back in here at 11:30 for our business meeting, and the Metropolitan Courts business meeting is in Powell at 11:30 as well. Thank you.